Welcome back. Welcome in. This is Country Roads Confidential at earsports.com. I am Mike Casazza, joined today by Chris Anderson. It's an interesting split screen here, Chris. As always, you're in Virginia. I'm in West Virginia. Today is an elite camp day at West Virginia. What are you doing in Virginia? It's 97 degrees here. I had to do this out in the hottest temperature of the summer so far today, walking around trying to cover this camp. Minimal idea what I'm doing. I'm afraid I'm going to melt though. How do I listen? I can cover the camp. I mean, I can look at 40 times and verticals and figure out who gets talked to, all that stuff. How do I survive the heat?
Don't know. Hey, they got the Gatorade on the side. Have been informed that old people, media members like ourselves, are allowed to have it, even though it's put out for campers. So
Mm.
feel free to indulge, get your electrolytes back up. But uh, the old saying that, and I remember, I mean, we've been hearing this for years of it being 20 degrees hotter out on that turf. It might be legit. So if it's 97, like for the rest of the world there in Morgantown, it's probably 110 standing there on that field out in the wide open. So
Yeah, you wear sneakers, right?
yeah.
I don't, man, because like my feet were just dying the first couple of times I was out there. So I like wear like comfortable flip flops. But the problem is I get those rubber pellets in it too,
Yep.
and then also my flip flops are black, and they just start to get way too hot, dude. There's no right answer to this question. This is gonna be an adventure today, um, and maybe a 7-on-7 Wednesday and a 7-on-7 Friday too. So see how this goes. We'll regale you all with details, offers, information from the camp. Actually, some stuff's already started happening, Chris. You're already telling me that some of the highlights are going to be pulled out from underneath me. I'm not even going to get to see some of the good stuff that apparently has already happened early this morning. You can catch that on the board right now on the VIP side. We'll have updates, all that stuff as normal. Me, Andrew out there, no Chris, trying to make a big deal out of it. I'm not. We'll talk about basketball and baseball otherwise here today because during time away, during camps here. A lot has happened, but also in some regard, a lot has not happened too, which is still somewhat of a headline when it comes to basketball. And then obviously the baseball season over, transition of power beginning. A lot changing with college sports that could be good or indifferent for baseball, depending on how schools lean in. Let's begin though, Chris, with basketball. As everybody knows, I was gone for a couple weeks. Figured everything would be taken care of when I got back. So as I was getting caught up on everything, I'm doing the search on the website for new assistant coaches, who were the extra players in the roster, and none of that stuff happened. Still two assistant coaches to go. We do have one spot filled since I got back, I believe. Jaden Stone, I think, committed maybe the day I got back, something like that. So, okay, that's good. Um, Beyond that, though, still have one spot with one player who hasn't visited anywhere else and still two spots in the bench. I think all these things will probably finish up pretty soon because they're going to Italy as well. So they want to have a full team, full staff, full roster sooner than later. And people are already beginning to make it to campus, enroll. You see photos and social media stuff about workouts. So I imagine they're trying to wrap this up soon. Am I
Uh,
wrong?
you-
Because that
no,
has not been the case so far, right? They've taken their own
there's
time and patience.
yeah, not a sense of urgency. It doesn't feel like with a lot of these moves. And to be quite honest, it's kind of worked out. Like it's taken some time to get there, but all of the moves have been pretty good. Yeah, the roster currently is at 11 of the 13 scholarship spots filled after the addition of Jaden Stone. Um, we'll circle back to him in just a minute, but let's see, which way do I want to go? Because there's a couple things you mentioned there that have been the hot topics on the message board over the last, few weeks. And let's start with the coaches, I guess, because that was the thing is, hey, why were they not filling out these last two spots? Why is it not happening? And I have mixed feelings on this because my first thought is, hey, colleges have been getting by with three assistant coaches for decades. So what's the big deal about adding more than three at this point? However, we know mostly, right? I don't know if we're 100% on this, but like 99% that not all three of the guys who are currently announced as assistant coaches will be on the road uh, once a full staff is established. And that's the rule. There can be five quote unquote assistants. Only three of them can be on the road recruiting. West Virginia has three. Those three guys are on the road recruiting right now, but it's not the plan for them to be the three moving forward, or at least not all three of them. That kind of I don't want to say is bad, but it's it's time spent where somebody's doing a job they aren't normally going to do for this program, and a guy who would normally be doing that job for the program is not getting that experience for the program. That's the big negative for me on this. Not jumping to add assistant coaches right now. Where's your stance on West Virginia's current situation with the assistant coaches?
Come around and all this stuff. I don't know. It's been forever since I covered a coaching change, and assistant coaching transactions has not been something I or we have been familiar with here. So I just assumed a head coach would come in and fill his staff out as soon as possible. Nope. So shame on me for not knowing that. But I also see that maybe doesn't make sense because similar to players, Chris, you really want to have fits. And if you get an assistant coach who doesn't do exactly what you want or doesn't know parts of the country, or I don't know, maybe Chris's contract rolls over and the buyout goes down when you hit a certain date in the calendar. There's all sorts of different things to account for that I had not thought of that people had told me. But I think the point that you made, you can get by with three on the road, one in the office. They have that. Nelson Hernandez is their their roster management guy. They have three assistants with degrees out on the road. You can do that, and then if Nick Norton is, for example, is not going to be a full-time on the road assistant coach, he's also an assistant and director of player development. It might make sense for him not to be out on the road recruiting. He's also the youngest of the assistant coaches. No harm in him going out to do on the road recruiting. That's good for him. He's been with DeVries for a while, so perhaps this is good for him down the road, whether it's with this staff or with some other staff. Is it best for West Virginia right now? I don't know that he's even helped or hurt. Not sure. So, like, how can it be a bad thing if it's not apparent one way or the other? Fine with that. And I think most of the time you're going to see your lead assistant coach, your head coach, probably do a lot of the recruiting, which seems to be the case right now with Chester Frazier doing a lot of the stuff. So I think when it gets into the season and a normal cycle, yeah, you want to have your people so they can work their neighborhoods, their connections, all the stuff and all the people that they know. But now, Chris, it's just such a matter of from the moment they hit the ground to today of just trying to scramble a little bit and fill in the pieces in a rush early with quantity and quality, and then a little bit more calculated toward the finish. So it slowed down for sure. There was a rush for a while of offers and visits and trying to get people here. I think you can slow down once you have a core, maybe some surrounding parts, and be a little bit more calculated. Seems like they have. I don't know. I was never really worked up by this, but I've certainly calmed down about it. I was curious. I didn't know as much. I think the more you see things happen here and the more you learn about what they're doing and how they're doing it, you start to understand and appreciate the why they're doing it this way too.
And everything's different. Like I think there's still a lot of people, and maybe somewhat myself included here, that are stuck in the old ways, let's say, of how recruiting works and how the timeline goes. The standard timeline is you reach out to a player, the player gets a visit or an offer, then gets a visit, whichever way it goes, an offer and then visits, or a visit and then offer, and then you go on and get a commitment. We've seen that's not the case with this. A big holdup with Javon Small, for instance, who committed, and then other schools were still pursuing him, and he didn't sign. And this is I think the podcast we talked about right before you left the country was, why is he not signing? And Kansas was trying to get back in there, but there was also this fact that Small had never visited West Virginia. He'd never been on campus. And he came the next day to Morgantown with his mom, took a visit, and I don't want to say the coaches locked him in a room until he signed his financial aid paperwork so they could announce him, but I'm not saying they didn't do that. No, um, that got done. But then there's also, like, for instance, Jaden Stone, and he signed his paperwork, and I did an interview with him, and he said, "Yeah, I'm in Australia." I said, well, "Did you come up visit?" No, never visited West Virginia. Was in Australia. Didn't know the coaches. He's going to see Morgantown for the first time when he arrives later this summer to enroll with the program. So it's different. The old ways of this standard visit the school, meet everybody, get an offer, commit, that's gone. I'm not saying it's better or worse, but this is how it's going to work, especially with some of these high profile transfers. So some of that stuff is going to throw off your timeline just a bit. But the good news is Small is signed, Stone is signed, and even one that I don't want to say we forgot. We mentioned it on the podcast, but Joseph Yusufu, the point guard or presumed backup point guard, he hadn't even signed yet. And as of when we did the last podcast, or not the last podcast, but the last podcast before you left the country. So that's done. Now all 11 are signed. They're as locked in as you can be in this day of college athletics. And now the staff is kind of moving on, which takes me to Duncan Powell, the forward from Sacramento State. Um, Came up for a visit 2 weeks ago, chose not to do interviews afterwards, hasn't visited anywhere else, as far as I could tell. Had some interest from other programs. It's June 17th, and he is not signed. He's not chosen a school. I don't know what that means. I don't know what his timeline is, but as of right now, it feels like that should be good news for West Virginia.
Would think so. I think one of these metrics we have to use now is like a calendar and look at like when is their birthday? Will they announce on Father's Day? Do they have a grandmother or a grandfather they want to announce on that date? Maybe it's as simple as that right now too. So all of our biographical research on players, is he right-handed? What was his percentage shooting in the paint? What's his corner 3-point percentage? What's his birthday? Um, what's his mom's birthday? Like maybe it's a Father's Day homage, something like that. So it's so random anymore. The point you make about visits is pretty interesting too, because in the transfer era, and you've been over this, like Powell doesn't want to talk. That's not unusual for players. They don't want to do a lot or any of this stuff because they've done it once, sometimes twice before, and they're just not into it. Like, let me just get the paperwork signed. Let me talk to the coaches or make the visit. And then more on top of that, when you're coming from Detroit Mercy or Sacramento State, Yusufa was in Morgantown, Javon Small was in Morgantown. They'd been there before. But if you're coming from a smaller school, like, do you really have to see the facilities? I'm going to assume that West Virginia has better stuff than Detroit Mercy and Sacramento State. So you could tell them, hey, we got a practice facility and we got a hot tub. Let's say no more, coach. I'm in, right? It's going to be a step up. So it's not as important for them. And they know that they're going to play in the Big 12. They're going to play against Big 12 teams. You have some FaceTime and some conversations with the coaches. I think that's more important than like the amount of hills on campus. Where is the mountain layer? Um, what can I do on a Saturday in the summer? Like that stuff, it sounds good. Like, and maybe if you're going to be here for 4 or 5 years, that's the case. But in this 1 or 2 year era of players, and they've been through it before, I think it's probably easier than we maybe initially recognize or acknowledge, and that explains maybe why some of the context clues before, like a visit, that's not really as telling anymore. And it could be something as simple as like a kid's birthday or like a relative's birthday or when he can actually um, sit down with people and make a decision and make an announcement too. But at this point, you would kind of be surprised if Powell wasn't one of the last two, just because of what we know and more importantly, what else we don't know. We don't know any other names.
Well, the other thing they announced was the Italy trip, which you mentioned earlier. That's coming up pretty quick, to not have a full roster. And like you said, you would think that they would want to have a full roster and a full complement of coaches before that goes. So when we were talking calendars and timelines and all that, that seems to be, or whatever. We'll have to check on this. Like there has to be, I'm assuming, some sort of requirements in order to be able to take that trip, waivers and this and that, medical forms, all that stuff. You got to get that information into the school someday, not 24 hours before the trip. It's got to be before that. So I'm assuming there's a deadline that is before that West Virginia needs to get everyone on board that is planning on going.
Well, visa status is important. Remember that? And then I'm pretty sure you just have to be eligible to play. So in this era now where like everybody who transfers is eligible, that's not a concern. Academics, we don't know. I just don't know. So somebody's academically ineligible. That would be news to us. But at this point, you would think anybody who's signed to West Virginia and is eligible to play will be on that plane going to Italy in just a couple of weeks. So that would be a good thing. Then you got to remember the international stuff too, Chris. I don't have the list of people in front of me, but far fewer international prospects on this team than last year, where you had Canadians and Estonians. And part of West Virginia's recruiting appeal was the fact that they had kind of figured some things out with how to do NIL overseas. There's a movement to really make that far less restrictive. And actually, it involves Shelley Moore Capito from West Virginia, who I've been trying to get a word with for a while and have not been able to. So hopefully we can fix that soon. But Ofri Nave. How many other international players are on the team? Is Stone Australian?
Yes,
So
yes. Yeah.
so the thing is, you can go overseas and you can do NIL business if you have an F1 visa. You can't do that in the US. So that's a small thing, but Stone you don't have to worry about. I mean, if you're one of the last two players and you're Finnish, for example, or Italian, or if people say, oh, let's get an international big. Let's get a South American guard, whatever. Then that might be an incentive for those people to hurry up and get this done, or just to jump aboard because they can get it accomplished where maybe they couldn't in another part of the United States. But I also wonder how many international players are truly familiar with NIL, the opportunities, the restrictions, and if even that's a consideration for a player at this point at his career. A high school senior coming in, I don't know that you're going to have college transfers from Europe coming to Europe, Europe to America, so that might not even be a thing anymore too. So you really might be adding one or two players for just basketball purposes, Chris, and nothing like tricky NIL runarounds.
Before we make a switch over to baseball, you got any concerns about, I don't want to say concerns about the roster, but concerns of what is lacking on the roster? Is there anything, we've spent plenty of time over the last few months being like, oh, hey, they need a shooter, a point guard, a big, and they've added different pieces over time. Is there anything else that you're like, man, if they don't get X, it's a problem?
No, because my fill in the blanks would be somebody who's tall and has some size to him, and then somebody who is just like a more traditional, let's say, boring point guard. Going to dribble the ball, going to break pressure, going to get the teammates involved. Is not going to be a person who wants to get his own shot. I'm not sure that this roster works better or is supposed to work with one or both of those parts in here. And if you look at some of what the Drake teams did before, they had a great center the past couple of years in Brody. Can they function without that? Maybe. And can you replicate that? Like he's 6'11, 270, and became a good offensive player, but not a throw to him and let him back it down. So I'm not sure you need that. And if you can get by getting similar numbers to his, maybe you can do that at 6'9, 6'8. I'm not sure they have that guy right now. Don't get me wrong, but is is there a 6'11 guy out there? Maybe not. And someone who's going to really make you behave differently on offense, maybe on defense. No, probably not. So that doesn't concern me so much. And again, when you have Javon Small and you don't necessarily have a true backup one, but Small is going to play the majority of the minutes. And if you do get a guy who, like I said, is your boring point guard who just runs the offense, dribbles, breaks pressure, doesn't turn over, plays some defense, you're going to get that for a couple minutes a half. A couple times a year is that going to make a big difference? I'm not sure that, again, that changes the way that they run things here too. So those would be the names of the profiles on my wish list, but I'm not so concerned about it because adding those things, yeah, maybe it completes the picture for me. Doesn't necessarily mean it does that for West Virginia, and it doesn't change things or it doesn't advance things in the direction that maybe it's going. But I do think you would like to have just some traditional pieces here, someone who's big and can play center, and someone who's sound and can play point guard. But not a concern because I don't think that they're missing that, and it just pushes us across the goal line. I think they're missing it, and it just completes the picture.
All right, let's switch to baseball. Let's see if they can complete the picture here
Yeah.
because we saw last summer how important this summer transfer window can be for baseball program. We'll get into who's leaving, who's coming in just a second, but just a reminder of what happened last summer. West Virginia University announced 8 transfer additions in the summer for the baseball program. Derek Clark, pretty good, ace pitcher. Tyler Switolski, the number 2 pitcher, at least for the postseason. Oliver, a reliever that tied for the second most innings pitched and was pretty good. Hayden Cooper, who was hit or miss, but was in the rotation, was the number 4 guy most of the time. Luke Lyman, limited action, but had the lowest whip on the staff, which is walks and hits per inning pitched. So a little bit of promise there. Reed Chumley, starting third baseman, cleanup hitter. Kyle West, starting DH. Ben Lumsden, starting right fielder. So what is that? 7 key contributors out of the 8 additions in the summer. So you can really make or break your upcoming season with what happens in the summer. And I think West Virginia, so far, as of 9:42 a.m. on June 17th is off to a pretty darn good start as far as ins and outs in the portal for this program. Now, there's still a lot of time to go. There's still the Major League Baseball draft that's coming up next month, and we know that JJ Weatherholt's going to be gone for that. He's still got a year of eligibility, but go ahead and chalk him up as a top 10 pick and gone. A couple of West Virginia's high school commits are in the picture for the MLB draft, and that'll be interesting. See what they do. Even a couple of the other guys that are on the team right now that are juniors this year that are eligible for the draft, they might have some decisions to make, especially with the way they finished this season. So, Mike, a current recap of what's happening in the portal first. Transfers out of the program, officially listed in the NCAA transfer portal as of this very moment. Infielders Nick Barone, Tony Konopayets, outfielders Lincoln Pack and Tyler Cox, catcher Luke Sepek, and left-handed pitcher Andrew Holloway. Not, I mean, those guys, they had promising players, but none of those guys really made a difference on this year's team. Were not major contributors in any way. Transfers into the program. Griffin Kern, a left-handed pitcher from Quincy University. One of the very first things that somebody tweeted, and slow some West Virginia fans down on this, but it was, hey, left-handed pitcher from a small school that's dominant. Hey, the next Derek Clark. Don't get ahead of yourself. Jack Cartsonas, a right-handed pitcher from Kent State, who was very solid. Chase Swain, shortstop from Manhattan that batted darn near 400. And then Reese Bassinger, who is another right-handed pitcher, came in a relief type pitcher. He made, I believe, it was 27 appearances and like 60 innings. So he's a guy that can do 2 or 3 innings at a time as a middle reliever. And had an ERA around 3. So you bulking up that bullpen, which was admittedly a problem at times for this team. Adding a nice shortstop with a bat, adding another left-handed pitcher that can throw some nasty stuff. Pretty darn good start.
Yeah, it's like they know what they're doing, Chris. I think you worry a little bit about a coaching transition and all that comes with it, but Steve Saban's the head coach now. He's been their recruiting guy for a couple of years, and it's not just him, but he's he's the guy who's kind of held the marionettes in place and made them all work. And I think that that's good for continuity. And when you see some of these things happening, like you can joke about a Division II left-handed starting pitcher. Well, maybe you have your eye on that level of baseball and you're figuring out who's good and who can get on your team quickly because the postseason ends earlier. There's still games going on right now too. So it's you're not going to get players from the best 8 teams in the country transferring right now unless they're just not part of the team. You're not going to get the best players, the best transfers because a lot's going on. So if Division II is over and you like the look of a pitcher or a shortstop or a DH or whatever, and you can get it done early, that's not a bad thing. It doesn't mean he's going to be Derek Clark, but if he could be a guy who can pitch for you, then get that done earlier on. And then, yeah, the stats are probably impressive for the other players you mentioned, but there's something there that it'd be really fun to listen to Saban's talk about what he saw, how he knew about this person, because I'm sure there's something in there where they were encouraged to get this done soon. There might have been competition for it, but to be this accomplished this early, like the season's been over for what, 8 days now, 9 days now, and to have a couple of things done, I think that's pretty good. So I'm sure they weren't tampering or anything like that. And then it's so quick where Chris, when you have to have those NIL conversations too. And this is a team that was playing not that long ago, and then had a period of mourning the season and the changing of power for the manager and all that stuff, and give them a day, right, and then to be bang back on the road and doing this stuff, hit the ground running. I think that's pretty interesting and pretty promising too. But that's what 5 names you mentioned. There's gonna be a lot more than that, man.
Yeah, six out and 4 in right now. So
4, okay. I think there's gonna be more than that. Obviously, you had, like you said, 8 last year, so maybe double that. But um, I think when you have a change like this too, baseball's prone to turnover. West Virginia, like many schools, has had a number of transfers across time. You're probably going to have normal attrition, and it may be exaggerated by someone who really liked Maisie, who might not like Sabins, who might be a this role for Maisie, but has been told he'll be this role for Sabins, and maybe he leaves. I think you're going to see that number go up too. But then the question is, can the coaching change stimulate interest for people to come there? And West Virginia baseball has been good for a couple of years, has facilities up, has facilities coming, power conference, looks like good NIL, gets players to the pros, so on and so forth. Doesn't have Randy Maisie. So how do you work around that? How involved will Randy Mazie be with recruiting? That'd be something I'd be curious about too. I'm sure he's not picking up the phone and calling people, but could he be an asset? Could he be a supplement? Could he answer questions? Could he talk about how much he endorses Steve Saban's? Remember, he's still part of the university. He's still going to have a job and a role too. So there's something that says he can't do that. A lot of things they can actually make positive of in a situation that you might look at and say, oh boy, it's not as good as it was a year ago. Well, why can't it be? And you have parts of the program who can step forward and say, no, 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 this is good, and here's why.
The last, maybe not the last, but maybe the most obvious hurdle remaining, other than trying to keep guys in for the transfer portal, is the Major League Baseball draft. And there are some key guys for West Virginia that will have decisions to make.
This is so
Um,
complicated too.
yeah. Well, and here's the list of guys: Aiden Major, Tyler Switolski, Grant Hussey, Brody Kresser, Kyle West, and I know people are going to be confused over this. I'll explain in a second. But
Yeah.
Logan Save. Usually the rule is you got to get through your junior year or you have to turn 21. Except it's not 21 before the draft. It's 21 within 45 days of the draft. So he turns 21 after the draft, but before the 45-day window. So he is technically eligible for the Major League Baseball draft. That Did that sound like a lot of very important players to you, Michael? Because it
The
sure did
starting
to me.
lineup, Chris.
Ah,
um, so is it 40 days before, 45 days before, and 45 days after?
no, no, no. So if you turn 21, any point up to 45 days
Okay.
after the draft. So if you turn
Okay.
21 before the draft at any point, you're good. Like,
Oh
for
yeah,
guys
yeah,
who
yeah.
redshirt and all that stuff. But
Yep.
yeah, so you can get it 45 days after the draft. You're still good.
I
You're
would
still
bet
eligible.
you run those names by me again. I think I called all but one.
Aiden Major,
Gone.
Tyler Switolski,
Gone.
Logan Save, okay, Grant Hussey. For those that are listening and not watching, Mike did a Grant Hussey,
Gone.
Brody Kresser,
Eh.
and Kyle West.
Well, there's something about that Kyle Wells bat, that left-handed sweet swing, maybe gone. Listen, all those guys could be picked in a normal draft. What's normal anymore? Normal's 20 rounds. That's really tricky too. That's a thing that people don't really recognize too. That it's much shorter. That's like what, half, I think, of what it used to be. So there are not as many picks. That's one thing. The other thing is too is that last year, um, what was Wallace's first name? The outfielder Wallace. Can't remember his name. Undrafted. He's in AAA, Chris. Like that was the senior last year. Landon Wallace. Landon
Yeah.
Wallace was undrafted, a senior. He's in AAA already. So sometimes you're going to see the draft use as leverage, where a senior doesn't have a choice. He's got to go. So you don't draft him and you sign him or whatever. And someone like Saab, the reason I didn't really give you a facial expression is that's a guy who can come back and be a face of a team. I think he's a catcher. He's got a really good bat. The offense, the defense, all that stuff is there too. Maybe he spends the future in the field or DH or whatever, and he's not a catcher, and that physical wear and tear that comes off, and he just blossoms as a hitter or whatever else he does. I'm saying he could be in for a big year if you can keep him. But if he's a mid round pick, I don't think he's an early round pick. But if he's like in a round that makes you go, well, now there's leverage because you can sign him, you can work all the angles on him, and then you can outdo the NIL in Morgantown, I think. So there's some questions there too. I think Aiden Major's got a big time arm, and the way the season went for him, I just wouldn't be surprised if he got drafted and went. Switolski, left-handed, great postseason, known a little bit too. It's not the first time he did this. He had some good numbers before. I'd be surprised if he didn't come back, or if he did come back. Hussey, beauty in the eye of the beholder there. Same with West. Like if you can work on that swing and you can get a good contact power hitter, first baseman, DH in the minors, that's fine. There's some things you can look at there. So, and then Kresser, he's played a lot of college baseball, Chris. Does he want to give it another shot here and really up his stock? But again, he loses leverage if he goes too. So, or if he stays, he comes back, he loses his leverage next year too, and he could be undrafted like Wallace. But it can also work out like Wallace too. So there's a lot to do there. It's complex, man. But the fact that it's 20 rounds now, the fact that NIL is on campus, the fact that I think there's a lot of people who want to see this work like last year. Different reason, coach going, coach arriving. I think there's a similar motivation maybe for some players. They want to make this work. So they have, I mean, on top of recruiting and keeping your roster together, you also have to do the draft too, which is, as you mentioned, for 45 different reasons, so to speak. That's a task for teams at this stage of the year.
And there's one more angle on this, and in a something for you fans to watch. This draft is in July.
Mhm.
If a player is taken in the top 10 rounds of that
Yeah.
20 round draft, consider them gone.
Yeah.
Because for Major League Baseball teams, if they take a player in the top 10 rounds, but then don't sign them, they still lose that portion of their signing money that the money that they're allowed to use, their pool of money that they're allowed to use to sign players. So they are doing their homework. They are talking with players. No Major League Baseball team is going to take a kid in the top 10 rounds if he doesn't think the kid is going to sign. Once you get after that 10 rounds, the odds of a player coming back will probably increase a good bit because maybe that's a point where a team's like, hey, I don't know if we can get this kid, but maybe if we take him later, go outside of above and beyond what our slotted pool money is for this, signing bonus money is for this, and try to convince this kid, maybe. But if you go in the top 10 rounds, consider that player gone at this point in time because MLB teams are no longer going to use those spots for kids that aren't going to sign.
Hmm. Yeah. And the high school players, like you mentioned too, that's a good thing because they make it to campus. That's fine. But boy, they're going to be that you look at those guys more likely now than before because you have them in your system for a while and you can pull them away, but that really does. Boy, that bugs college coaches so much. It's like an eighth round pick. All of a sudden, you're like, I got him. Maybe I don't. We'll see. So yeah, the season's over, and in some regard, Chris, just getting started. But um, there's a lot happening off the field too when it comes to the way the scholarships may be restructured. Full scholarships now too instead of fractionals, and all the momentum that West Virginia baseball has going for it. Probably time to lean in and pay attention to this because there's a lot going on. It could be interesting. It does seem promising right now. I wrote about this. The headline says that you can read the story, but there are worse times to make a change like this for baseball, and West Virginia has enough going in the right direction that the rules and the changes might actually be beneficial to what they're doing and what they're trying to accomplish. Um, that about wraps it up here, Chris. I think I'm off to camp. You're off to hang out in the shade.
No, I
Yeah.
think I might have it worse than you. You're going to stand there in 97-degree heat and watch camp for 5 hours. I'm going to stand over here in 95-degree heat with a bunch of 10-year-olds and their fathers at a baseball tournament yelling at me because I don't properly know how to coach 10-year-olds, apparently. So,
I've been trying to tell him. Until next time, I'm Mike Casazza.
and I'm Chris Anderson.
We'll talk to you then.